Julius's '68 Plymouth Valiant was in mint condition. He kept it under a tarp inside his garage, and most of the miles he put on the car were his once weekly drives to the grocery. His top speed on the highway was usually a maddeningly slow 45 miles per hour, even during out-of-town drives, which helped explain why David had never applied for a driver's license. But because this was an emergency situation, the old man tore down the highway at the blistering pace of 55. The high beams of faster cars bore down on them like the eyes of mechanical wolves. Many of these cars were stuffed to the windows with people and suitcases and boxes of food. Some had mattresses lashed non-aerodynamically to their roofs, and when they zoomed past, the passengers would all turn and stare at the two men in the midnight blue classic who were tooling along like they were out enjoying a Sunday drive. The faces behind the windows were hardened into masks of fear by the first 12 hours of the invasion. "Slow down, you ding-a-ling!" Julius waved a fist and shouted as a van whizzed past at double the Valiant speed. "55, Dad, please," David said, calling the old man's attention once more to the speedometer. "You're dipping." "I'm dipping?" "Dipping below 55. Keep your speed up." David would have liked to be passing every car on the road, but he knew his father's limits, and 55 was one of them. Any faster, Julius felt, and the car would self-destruct beneath them. David bit his tongue and tried to relax. There was still time. Besides, he couldn't push too hard after the way Julius had accepted the mission. David had expected him to put up a fight, to rant and rave for at least half an hour about what a ludicrous idea it all was. But as soon as he'd explained why he had to get there in one breathless tumble of words, Julius had leaned close and stared into his child's eyes for a long moment, as if searching for something in particular. Something he saw convinced him. "Fix me a sandwich," he said, shrugging. "I'll get my coat." 30 minutes later they were out of town, thanks in large part to David's incredible prowess at navigation. Having spent a good deal of his life in the back of a taxicab, he knew every shortcut there was. Once they were out on the highway and pointed for D.C., David broke out his laptop to learn more about the signal, still surprised that his plan had met with so little resistance from his usually resistant father. "It's the White House, for crying out loud," Julius erupted, as David stared at the numbers on his computer. "You can't just walk up and ring the doorbell. Good evening. Hey, let me talk to the president for a minute. You think they don't know what you know? Believe me, they know. They know everything." "This they don't know, trust me," David said, trying to concentrate. "If you're so damn smart, explain me something. How come you went 10 years to MIT, graduated with honors, and won all those awards just so you could become a cable repairman?" The question, like many Julius asked, hit below the belt. "Please don't start in on me about that," David muttered in a way he hoped would close the subject. It was one of his sorest spots, what everyone else referred to as his lack of ambition. He was grossly overqualified for his position at Compact and had been headhunted by research labs all over the nation. He still got occasional letters asking if he'd be interested in working for scientific projects as diverse as the Super Collider in Texas or the Biosphere in Arizona. He could have pretty much written his own ticket in jobs like those, but he preferred to stay where he was. He loved the city, his job, his father, and, until she left to work for Senator Whitmore, his wife. Stung by the question, David pretended to work at the computer. He couldn't have cared less what other people thought of him, but his father's disappointment was a thorn in his side. 7 years, David grumbled. 7 years? What are you saying? I was only at MIT for 7 years, and I'm not a cable repairman. I'm the chief consulting systems engineer. Excuse me, Mr. Big Shot, Julius said derisively, leaning close to the steering wheel. All I'm saying is they've got people to handle this kind of thing. If they want HBO, they'll call you. Another low blow. David bit his lip and checked the speedometer again. You're dipping. The First Lady had the Swank Hotel lounge to herself. Her retinue of assistants and Secret Service agents had backed off to give her some privacy while she telephoned her husband. Whenever the door opened, she could see the herd of reporters waiting for her out in the main lobby. A handful of LAPD cops had corralled them behind velvet ropes while they waited for her to emerge and hold the press conference they'd been promised. Mayor? Tom, hello. How are you holding up? She asked. Considering the circumstances, Whitmore answered, pretty well. It was 11 p.m. his time, and his voice sounded wary. Where are you? In the bedroom. I thought I should try and lay down for a while. Good idea. What's the mood like back there? Listen. He changed the subject. I'm arranging to send a helicopter to the Biltmore. There's a helipad on the top of the building. I want you out of Los Angeles as soon as possible. If those things decide to get ugly on us. He didn't finish the sentence. Marilyn smiled. I thought you'd say that, but I just saw Connie's press conference. Tom, I'm proud of you for staying in the White House. I think it's the right thing to do. But the statement you're trying to make isn't going to be very convincing if they watch me hightail it out of here. You're directly below that thing, aren't you? Indeed. Her hotel, the historic and luxurious Biltmore, was only 2 blocks from the old First Interstate building. The center of the slowly spinning craft was directly overhead. Downtown L.A., usually crowded on a Friday night with an incongruous mix of stretched limousines and promenading Centro Americanos, was nearly empty. A ghost town. Yes, it's still up there, she allowed. But I've got a dozen news crews waiting in the lobby. Johanna's out there setting up a news conference and then a few interviews. I'll leave as soon as they're finished, I promise. No way. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but we have no idea what these ships have planned. I'm going to. Tom, listen to me. She cut him off sternly. I know you're worried, but I have a responsibility here too. People will listen to me. He couldn't argue with that. In one public opinion poll after another, Marilyn Whitmore had proven to be the single most popular figure in all of Washington. What Jacqueline Kennedy had done with glamour, Mrs. Whitmore had done with her down-to-earth style. She had won the heart of the nation by being the First Lady to wander the halls of the White House in blue jeans and bare feet. She had the simple, heroic beauty of a pioneer woman and a no-nonsense manner of speaking to the public that inspired trust. The political establishment disliked her, but for ordinary Americans, she was a symbol of hope, their representative at large in the corridors of power. As her husband's presidency had floundered over the previous several months, she had become the administration's most potent political weapon. She felt it was her duty to get on the airwaves and try to keep the evacuation of the cities as orderly as possible. There was a long pause on the phone line. Oh, all right. Her husband relented, his tone making it clear how little he liked the idea. But I want you on the roof in 90 minutes. I'll have a helicopter waiting to fly you to Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado. Make it 2 hours and you got yourself a deal. Then, switching gears, she asked about their daughter. How's the munchkin? Good. She'll be airlifted out of here and meet you at Peterson. We had a little jailbreak this afternoon. She got away from the nanny and ran into the Oval Office just as the ship was coming over the city. Oh, God, the girl's mother moaned. How did she react? Like the rest of us, it scared her half to death. She's conked out right next to me. Want me to wake her up? No, let her sleep. But I'm worried about her making that trip by herself. Will you make sure there's a phone on board so I can talk to her? Of course. But she won't be alone. In exchange for staying on at the White House, I'm letting the staff evacuate all their kids to Peterson. I think I'd have a mutiny on my hands if I didn't. A soft knock came at the president's bedroom door. Just a second, he called across the room before returning to his conversation. I've got to go. I'll probably see you at NORAD in the morning. Neither one of them wanted to get off the phone, but both felt the tug of their responsibilities. And honey. Yes? I love you. I love you too, very much. And I'll see you in a few hours. Bye. Whitmore, still wearing his slacks and dress shirt, walked across the room and opened the door. Standing in the dim hallway were General Gray and Chief Nimzicki. We have the report you asked for, sir, Gray said, handing over a fax. There are still only 36 of the ships. We haven't spotted any more entering our atmosphere for several hours now. And these are the affected cities? Whitmore asked, studying the report. Yes, sir. Whitmore took his time studying the data. He could see that Nimzicki was edgy and seething, chomping at the bit to say something. When the president finally handed the sheet back to Gray, the defense secretary could contain himself no longer. Excuse me for saying so, but this is insane, he said between clenched teeth. Absolutely suicidal. By sitting on our hands like this, we're giving away our first strike capability. We've come here to urge you to take action, to initiate nuclear attack. The word we took Whitmore by surprise. He looked at Gray and asked for his opinion. General? As you know, Mr. President, I'll support whatever course of action you choose. This is a tough call, whether to fire first or sit tight. But I'm inclined to agree with Al on this one. Perhaps we should strike first. It was a surprising answer coming from Gray. There was no love lost between him and Nimzicki, but they'd joined forces to present this plan to their leader. Whitmore leaned against the doorway and rubbed his eyes. He thought about it for a few moments. I don't think so, he finally announced. You don't punch the biggest kid in school till you're damn sure he's the class bully. Nimzicki was about to press his argument further, but a sharp look from Gray shut him down. The president has spoken, the look said, and that ends the discussion. What about our attempts to communicate with them? Whitmore asked. Gray filled him in. Attempts on all frequencies have led nowhere. Atlantic Command is trying to rig up a kind of visual communication we can put right in their backyard. They'll have to answer us. Let's just hope we like what they have to say. No one noticed what a gorgeous night it was. A million evening stars washed by a comfortably warm breeze. The nervous souls in the trailer park were completely absorbed with questions of safety and survival. That afternoon, neighbor after neighbor, people who had lived there for years, had packed up their belongings and driven away, many without any specific destination. At the same time, new arrivals, mostly dilapidated RVs on the verge of engine failure, were pulling up to the gates where the manager had erected a flimsy roadblock. An obese woman in a floral muumuu collected what she considered a fair price before allowing the refugees, their pitiful faces cowering behind the windows, to roll past and claim one of the narrow dirt lots. Field workers stood around their battered Fords listening to Spanish-language radio stations deciding which way they should run. Anxious women peered through their screen doors every few minutes for signs of danger before locking themselves inside once more. Everybody was on edge, keyed up like high-stakes gamblers hanging around a casino waiting for the rules of a strange new game to be announced. Barefoot and cross-legged, Miguel surveyed the whole scene from above. He'd climbed onto the roof of his family's trailer, bringing their small television with him, hoping to get some decent reception. After several experiments with wire coat hangers and wads of tinfoil, he achieved the best picture quality he was going to get. He leaned back on his hands and watched the news, the warm wind playing through his shoulder-length hair. There had been no word from Russell since their confrontation alongside the tomato field that morning. Typical, he thought. Whenever there's any kind of crisis, he evaporates. Like he'd done 1,000 times that day, Miguel glanced in the direction of Los Angeles. The dark hump of the mysterious ship was visible over the foothills separating the city from the desert. The rising sliver of moon cast a shadowy gloss along the eastern edge of the craft. Just below the ship, miles of headlights snaked through the canyon as thousands of motorists continued to escape from the city. Watching the lights come toward him down the highway, then change into glowing red tail lamps speeding away to the safety of Bakersfield, Fresno, Bishop, and points beyond. Miguel thought again about his plan. All afternoon he'd been turning it over in his mind. He had to get Troy and Alicia out of the area, away from the danger of the ship. The only place he knew to run was a relative's house in Arizona. The Case family had burned all their bridges over the last couple of years. Flipping channels, he thought about how he would propose the idea to Russell, if and when he ever returned. Then he saw something on the screen that stunned him almost as much as his first glimpse of the spaceship. One of the local channels was running a story supposedly showing the lighter side of the invasion. With a smirking, ironic tone, the anchorman read from the teleprompter. A local man who works as a crop duster was arrested today after he flew over parts of the San Fernando Valley in an antique airplane, tossing thousands of leaflets over the side. Miguel moaned out loud when he saw the videotape of his stepfather, feral and handcuffed, being escorted into the Lancaster police station. "You people better do something," Russell snarled at the news crews. "I was abducted by these aliens 10 years ago, and nobody believed me. They did all kinds of tests on me. They've been studying us for years. We've got to do something. They're here to kill us all." One of the deputies dragged Russell away and pushed him through the front doors of the station house. Back at the newsroom, the anchorman's eyebrows lifted. A rather unique reaction. The man, a drifter identified as Russell Case, is being held at Lancaster Police Station for further questioning. The handwritten, photocopied leaflets claimed, "What you watching?" A voice from behind startled Miguel, who instantly switched the channel. It was Troy, climbing up the ladder to see what his brother was doing. "Nothing." Miguel's voice was strangled with emotion. He cleared his throat and spoke again. "Hey, Troy, you remember Uncle Hector from Tuscan?" "Of course. He's got that Sega Saturn CD, 64 bits, remember?" "Yeah." "What would you think if we went there to stay with him for a while?" The younger boy nodded his approval. "That'd be pretty cool." Miguel looked at the highway for a minute, thinking. Then he made a decision. "Start packing up. We're going." On the television, First Lady Marilyn Whitmore was making a speech, another plea to remain calm. Miguel unplugged the set and brought it carefully to the edge of the roof. "We're leaving now?" Troy asked from the ladder, confused. "Right now." "What about Dad?" Miguel jumped off the side of the trailer, landing softly on his feet in the dirt. He stepped up onto the tire to retrieve the television. Noticing his little brother hadn't moved, he snapped angrily. "You heard me, Troy! Get your stuff ready to go!" Then he stomped off into the darkness of the trailer park to find his half-sister. He had a pretty good idea where he would find her. "But we can't leave without Dad," the boy complained. Miguel didn't look back. He slipped his hand under her shirt. "This could be our last night on Earth," he whispered. "You don't want to die a virgin, do you?" He tried to make it sound half joking and half serious, rolling the dice to see how far he could get. The question made Alicia nervous. She bought some time. Her mouth opened onto his for yet another long, hot, grinding, twisting kiss that pushed him backward against the driver's door. On top of him now, she came up for air and stared down at him. The yellow glow of a porch light seeped through the windows of the truck.
"What makes you think I'm still a virgin?"
The question embarrassed and encouraged him at the same time, made him think that tonight, after weeks of making out, he would finally have her. Alicia was no mind reader, and she didn't have to be one to know exactly what he was thinking. She could feel his excitement in the arc of his back, the way his fingers dug into her hips. Living in a 22-foot-long travel trailer with 3 other people was like spending an endless weekend in hell. Alicia, almost 15, wanted out, and the only way she could see that happening was for a man to take her away. The guy she was kissing wasn't exactly a man, but he was as close as Alicia had come to finding one. Andy was 18, and all around the trailer park he felt like a pretty big wheel. He and his mom, the manager, shared the largest permanent trailer in the park. He had a steady job, a new Toyota truck with a killer sound system, and plans for getting his own apartment. Alicia liked him, but at the same time, she wasn't ready for sex. She knew she'd allowed the conversation to go too far and found herself trying to figure a way out of the situation without looking like a big tease. Andy was still thinking about the virginity question when the door he was leaning on suddenly opened. The young lovers nearly toppled out onto the ground. Alicia's brother stood looking down at them.
"What the hell are you doing, Miguel?"
Untangling herself from Andy, she sounded angry and embarrassed, but was secretly relieved. "Come on, we're going to Tuscan."
"Right."
She rolled her eyes.
"Like I would go anywhere with you."
Without further discussion, Miguel reached past Andy and put a vice grip around Alicia's wrist. He pulled her out of the truck, bringing Andy with her. She landed outside with a thump and a growling scream. "Hey, dude, take it easy," Andy demanded. Miguel prepared to take him out with one skull-crushing punch. The savage look in his eyes paralyzed Andy, making him sit back down, muttering, "Whatever, it's cool." Alicia, fuming, shouted as she stumped across the dusty yard.
"Miguel Case, you are such an ass. You're a psycho who needs help. I'm telling Dad what you just did, and I hope he whips the hell out of you."
She then took off running, disappearing into the shadows. While Alicia pouted inside, the 2 boys grabbed flashlights and went to work. 20 minutes later, they disconnected the water, electrical, and sump lines, strapped the bicycle and the motorcycle to the back frame, brought in the folding chairs and the hibachi. The Case trailer was ready to roll. Miguel buckled himself into the driver's seat, fired up the engine, and muscled the column shift into drive. But he did not move. Standing in the glare of the headlights, wobbling slightly like an overweight, retarded elk, was his stepfather. Russell was out of jail, just in time to make their lives even more miserable. Miguel's first impulse was to hit the gas and run him over, slam into him and run over his flabby, drunken ass. Instead, he shifted into neutral and waited, eyes straight ahead. As carefree and cheerful as ever, Russell shuffled over to the driver's side window. "All right, kids, you read my mind. Let's get as far away from that thing as we can." He looked toward the dark shape over Los Angeles and shook his head. "Nobody understands, Miguel. Nobody believes me, but that thing is going to turn L.A. into a slaughterhouse. Mark my words." Miguel only looked back at him, a blank and hostile stare. Ignoring it or not noticing, Russell told the boy to open up and let him get behind the wheel. Instead, Miguel slipped out the door and closed it behind him. "They let you out?" It never occurred to Russell that he ought to feel guilty or embarrassed. "You're damn right they let me out. Since when is it a crime for a man to exercise his right to free speech? Whatever happened to First Goddamn Amendment? Anyway, they've got bigger fish to fry now, believe me. Come on, let's go." When Russell started toward the trailer, Miguel stepped in front of him, trembling. "We're leaving without you. Don't try to stop us." Finally, he had his stepfather's full attention. "What are you talking about?" "We're sick of it," Miguel said as calmly as he could. "We're sick and tired of picking up after you, of carrying your dead weight around." The boy took a breath, keeping his eyes on Russell's hands. "We've got enough money to make it to Tuscan and stay with Uncle Hector for a while." Russell stared at him as if it was the craziest thing anyone had ever said. "The hell you are!" he thundered loud enough for the entire park to hear. "I'm still your father, boy, and don't you forget it." That was the last straw. Miguel's fuse had burned all the way down, and now he exploded, going off like a rocket. "You are not! You are not my father. You're just some drunken fool that married my mother. And she took care of you like you were a stinking baby. And when she got sick, you did nothing. You're a lunatic, Russell, and you are nothing to me. Now please," he said more calmly, "move out of the way. I'll take care of us, and you take care of you." Russell took a long, deep breath, thinking it over. He was always half expecting something like this to happen, but now that the moment was here, it felt like being stabbed in the heart. "What about Troy?" "That's exactly what I'm talking about. You're so damn selfish. Try, for once in your life, to think about what's best for him. Who's the one who actually takes care of him? Who has to go around begging for money and jobs and medicine, huh? Who? Every time you screw up, I'm the one. I'm the one who has to do all the dirty work. I'm the one who has to get out there and scrape together enough to buy that damn medicine." Miguel could have gone on, but the sound of shattering glass stopped him. "Stop it! I'm not a baby!" Troy screamed. He had come outside and was breaking vials of his medicine on the pavement. "I don't need this stupid medicine," he yelled, hurling another one against the ground. "I don't need anyone to take care of me." As soon as he realized what was happening, Miguel darted through the headlights and grabbed his brother before he could throw the last vial. But as they struggled, Troy managed to drop the bottle and crush it under his sneaker. Furious, his brother grabbed a handful of the boy's hair and shook him. "You know how much that stuff costs? Now what happens when you get sick again? Answer me!" He waited for an answer, but his anger changed suddenly to sadness, and then to crushing despair. He tried taking a stand against his stepfather and tried to engineer an escape. All at once, he realized that he had failed, and failed miserably. Speechless, thoughtless, Miguel turned and disappeared into the trailer. "Sorry," Troy said softly. "Come on, let's get going, Troy boy." Russell led the way to the idling vehicle. David kept reminding himself that the gentleman behind the wheel was his father, a man to whom he owed love, patience, and filial gratitude. On the other hand, Julius was driving him absolutely berserk. The Levinson men hadn't spent so much time in a small space together since the summer David turned 13 and the family had taken that hellish road trip down to Florida to visit Aunt Sophie, who was ill and couldn't make it to David's bar mitzvah. As they drove, Julius, always the kibitzer, seemed less interested in traffic than in his nonstop conversation. He'd been talking since they left New York, jumping from one subject to the next, analyzing, criticizing, posing questions, then answering them. Twice a week over a game of chess in the park, it was fine. But confined to the cabin of the antediluvian Plymouth, bobbing along bad shocks like an ocean liner at 55 miles per hour, his constant chatter was pushing David to the brink of insanity. For the last 20 miles, Julius had been poring over the plot lines of some of the most recent movies he had seen, such as 1959's The Blob and the earlier War of the Worlds. There were too many similarities for Julius, amateur conspiracy theorist, to believe somebody somewhere had known all this would come to pass. The only time he was quiet was when he was listening to some strange new noise coming from the engine compartment. David bit his tongue and stayed quiet. This was, after all, the only way he had of getting himself to D.C. Every couple of minutes he would glance over at the speedometer, then check his watch. 55, Julius would boom when he noticed his son checking the speed. I'm going 55 miles per hour. Any faster and the engine will blow up. Trust me. There was nothing for David to do but to sink back in the seat and try to remain patient. Every mile or so, they shot past another vehicle pushed to the side of the road, out of gas or radiator hissing hot jets of steam into the night air. Traffic was backed up all the way to Washington, 40 miles away. David thought it was only a matter of time before the frustrated motorists knocked down the meridian barriers and took over the southbound lanes as well. That was exactly what was happening, under police supervision further up the highway. But for now, the boxy chrome and steel Valiant had the highway all to itself. David turned and looked out the rear window. There were no headlights behind him, only open, empty road. He looked ahead, no tail lights either, except for a seemingly abandoned police car parked sideways in the fast lane. The lights were flashing and both doors stood wide open, but as they sped past, there was no sign of the Maryland State Trooper who had stopped the car there. "We must be getting close," David said. "We're the only ones on this road." "The whole world is fighting each other to get out of Washington, and we're the only schmucks trying to get in." The highway led up a hill and around a long bend. As they came to the crest of the hill, they had their first direct line of sight toward the District of Columbia. Both men stared wide-eyed at the sky ahead. The lights of the nation's capital, rising into the night sky, reflected off the underbelly of a giant dark shape hovering over it, a spacecraft identical to the one Nate seen in New York. The city lights were just bright enough to show the massive gray outlines of the ship's dark flower design. Neither man uttered a word as they coasted down the hill. When a stand of pine trees blocked the view, Julius cleared his throat. "David, I suddenly have a strong desire to visit Philadelphia where there aren't any flying saucers. What about we turn around and just check your speed, please?" Without realizing it, the old man had slowed to 35 miles per hour. Now that they were approaching the city, David's manner became more urgent. Quickly, he reached into the back seat, retrieved his laptop computer, and booted it up. From a plastic file sleeve, he extracted a CD-ROM and popped it into the computer's external drive slot. Julius knew what a CD was, but he'd never seen one in person before. "What the hell is that thing?" he wanted to know. David held up the companion disc, Volume 2, waving it around with a fair amount of showmanship. "On these two little discs, Pops, is every single phone book in America." "On two little records?" Incredible, isn't it? David's fingers darted around the keyboard punching in commands. Julius wasn't going to admit it, but he was impressed. He leaned over and watched the name scroll by on the screen. "Let me guess. You're looking up her phone number." "Precisely, Sherlock." "One problem. What makes you think an important person like Constance is going to be listed in the phone book for every crackpot to call her?" "She always keeps her portable phone listed for emergencies. The problem is figuring out which name she's put it under. Sometimes she only uses her first initial, sometimes her nickname." He began trying various options while Julius looked on, trying to keep up. After 20 or so possible names failed to yield a match, David started to show his frustration. "Not listed, huh?" "I'll find it." David's voice sounded almost convincing. "I just haven't figured it out yet. It's usually under something like C. Spano, Connie Spano, Spunky Spano." "Spunky?" Dad was obviously amused. "I like that one. Try Spunky." Spunky was her college nickname. "Have you tried Levinson?" David frowned. "Please. She didn't take my name when we were married. Now that we're separated, she's going to start calling herself Levinson? I'm sorry, but I don't think so." Julius shrugged and looked away. So what if his ideas weren't worth trying? What did he care? Eventually, David gave in. "Oh, all right. We'll try Levinson." Julius leaned over and watched the name zip past as avidly as if he were watching a roulette wheel. Abruptly, the name stopped and the machine beeped to signal a match. "So what do I know?" the old man asked sarcastically. A loud, piercing scream made them glance up simultaneously. Headlights flashing and siren wailing, a police car was speeding down the wrong side of the road. Worse, it was leading a highway full of traffic, hundreds of stressed-out drivers determined to get away from Washington.
"I mean Gott!"
Julius pushed his glasses higher on his nose, bent closer to the wheel, and prepared for the inevitable. As soon as David realized they were too close and moving too fast to avoid the oncoming traffic, he did the only sensible thing. He let loose a blood-curdling scream. Julius jerked the car to the left, narrowly avoiding the lead car's front bumper, then to the right, just before they went head-on with a station wagon. A pair of sedans locked up their brakes, fishtailed into a collision, then bounced apart. Julius split the narrow gap between them, inches to spare on either side. "Slow down!" David yelled, his face as white as the headlights bearing down on them. Julius, leaning over the steering wheel, chewing on his lip, hardly touched the brakes. As car after car crashed around them, spinning like bowling pins, the Mario Andretti of the over 70 set swooped between them skillfully and, from the looks of it, fearlessly. 200 yards from where the mayhem began, there was an off-ramp. With one long tire-squealing tug on the wheel, Julius pulled the car from the fast lane to the right shoulder and then up the ramp. Adrenaline pumping, mouths open, knuckles gone bloodless white. The two of them stared straight ahead until Julius rolled the car to a gentle stop. Awed by what his father had just done, David turned and stared at him. "Dad! Nice driving, man." Without knowing why, he started laughing. Julius was breathing pretty hard. He took out a handkerchief and wiped his forehead. "Yeah, not bad, I didn't even scratch the paint job." Then, although there was nothing funny, he too started chuckling. It was the nervous, triumphant laughter of two men who had just lived through what should have killed them. For a few moments they forgot about getting to Washington and simply sat there in the car, laughing their heads off, the vast dark ship looming in the distance.